Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient city hidden underground in Mexico, which may give a better understanding of the Maya civilization.
A whisper from the jungle started it all. There was a noise that shouldn't have been there. A group of field researchers in the Yucatan Peninsula found something that would soon change the history of not only the Maya, but also the history of all people. It all began with a piece of bone that was buried under layers of ash and limestone. But what they found on that fragment, what the DNA showed, was darker, older, and much stranger than anyone could have imagined. The story starts in a remote area near Calakmul, which is already well known for its huge temple complexes and thick, suffocating canopy. Satellite images showed strange shapes under the ground, huge, geometric holes that didn't fit with the patterns of natural rock. The group thought they were looking at another ceremonial complex that had been buried, but as soon as they got there, they knew something was wrong. The air was thick and still in a strange way. When the digging started, the birds stopped singing. The wind even seemed to stay away from this part of the forest. They used ground-penetrating radar to map out a structure below the surface that was almost 100 feet wide, in a perfect circle, exactly the same on both sides. Everyone was confused by the data. People knew that the Maya were precise, but this was something else. It looked like a machine had carved the earth itself. As they dug deeper, they found a series of basalt stones. Each one was smooth and shiny, with a faint metallic sheen. They were glued together with a substance that was stronger than any cement found in ancient times. It wasn't made of limestone. It wasn't made of clay. It was a chemical mix that couldn't be identified and seemed to resist all attempts at analysis. The group nervously joked that it was superglue from space. That joke didn't last long, though. After 2 weeks of digging, they found a sealed shaft that went straight down. There were no signs or steps, just a smooth tunnel that led into total darkness. They first thought it was an old well, but the way it was lined up was too perfect. It was pointing north, true north, which was the same direction that stars and planets had been moving in for more than 10,000 years. That alone should have been impossible. When they finally put a camera down the shaft, they got stuck halfway. The signal flickered, and static cut through the feed. The picture froze for a second, then came back on, showing something strange. There were symbols carved into the wall in the shape of spirals, starbursts, and what looked like a repeating pattern of dots and lines. Not Mayan, not Olmec. Something from the past, something that isn't known. As the crew went down by hand, the temperature dropped quickly. Their lights barely broke through the dark. The air got heavy and metallic, like it was electric. The tunnel opened up into a room that was about 40 feet wide and shaped like a dome. It looked like melted glass was shining on its surface. When one of the researchers tapped the wall, the sound echoed for longer than it should have, as if the stone was empty, and then they saw it. There was a single stone platform in the middle of the room that was perfectly round. 3 skeletons were sitting cross-legged on it. Thousands of tiny crystal shards sparkled like stars all around them. The bones were very old, way older than the known Maya timeline. The skulls were long in a way that wasn't normal. When scanned, the bone density was denser than any other human remains found in the area. The scariest part? Keeping them safe. No mold, no bugs, and no decay. It looked like the bodies had just been put there. The first DNA test showed that all models of human ancestry were wrong. The sequences lined up with some known Amerindian haplogroups, but almost 20% of the genome didn't match anything that was already known. It wasn't dirty. The machine didn't make a mistake. It was something else altogether. A pattern deep inside their DNA that didn't belong on Earth. Dr. Elena Carvajal, the geneticist in charge of the study, saw something that made her uneasy. The unknown sequences weren't just random changes. They were structured, repeated, and mathematically correct. When put into binary code, the pattern made numbers that were the same as the ratio of the orbits of Earth and Venus. This finding wasn't just weird, it was smart. She named it sequence X47. The more they looked, the more impossible it seemed. When exposed to ultraviolet light, pieces of the bone gave off a faint, cold glow, a creepy blue light that pulsed in time with the rhythm. The pulse's frequency matched the electromagnetic resonance of a nearby site, about 3 kilometers away, where researchers had already found a huge circular hole in the ground. They thought it was just an old quarry. Now they weren't so sure. As news spread, more experts came to help with the dig. Linguists, biologists, and physicists. The room was given a new name, archaeogenetic anomaly. All of the data went against what we already knew about science. The carbon dating showed that the bones were almost 13,000 years old, which is hundreds of years before the first known Maya settlements. That meant that these people were not Mayan ancestors, but something that came before humans, or at least before civilization. After that, the writing came. A repeating glyph like a spiral galaxy was faintly carved into the obsidian-like wall. The same symbol has been found in many other ancient places in Mesoamerica, but this one is the oldest. The Maya called it Kuhul no Ek, which means the black star of the gods. Some people thought it was a metaphor for the underworld, while others thought it was a gateway to the heavens. But now, for the first time, there was physical evidence that seemed to link myth with biology. Dr. Carvajal came up with a scary idea. What if the Maya stories about the sky serpents and the gods of blood weren't myths at all, but memories passed down from their ancestors? What if their gods weren't gods at all, but genetic engineers? The more the investigation went on, the stranger the coincidences got. In the genetic code of the ancient remains, some parts matched exactly with geometric patterns carved into temples all over Guatemala. Living DNA has spirals, ratios, and even star maps in it. This wasn't evolution. This was planned. The site was closed off to the public by the third month. Soldiers came in under the pretense of preserving a biohazard. The equipment was taken away. All of the samples were sent to a secret research lab in Mexico City. But emails, photos, and bits of reports started to leak out. They talked about something amazing. The DNA wasn't just foreign, it was alive. Certain cells started to copy themselves in ways that human tissue shouldn't when they were exposed to electromagnetic fields. It was like the code in the genome was trying to start over. Then something happened that they couldn't explain. Seismic monitors in the area picked up a sudden, rhythmic vibration on a hot, humid night in late August. A beat, like clockwork, every 11 minutes. The frequency was the same as the glowing resonance seen in the old bones. They figured out where the pulse came from, and it wasn't from the lab. It was coming from below the jungle, from that huge round hole they had been ignoring. When a small group went back to look into it, they found something buried under layers of ash and volcanic rock, a ring that is about 300 feet in diameter and made of smooth, shiny metal. Instruments picked up weak magnetic interference, like a heartbeat deep in the ground. It was sleeping, but not dead. Samples taken from the rim showed something that shouldn't have been possible: titanium and iridium alloy mixed with obsidian. To make these metals, you need temperatures higher than 3,000 degrees Celsius. No civilization before the Industrial Revolution could do this, but there it was, humming softly and whispering through the ground. There was no doubt about the link. The genetic frequency of sequence X47 matched the pulse that came from the ring that was buried. It was like DNA was sending a message, and the machine was getting it. The researchers were most afraid of the idea of a machine from the past buried deep in the ground. The machine might still be listening, though. A few weeks later, Dr. Carvajal went missing. They cleaned up her lab overnight. All of her research notes were deleted. The only proof left came from an audio file that had been recovered from a broken drive. Her voice was weak, shaky, and hard to understand. "They're not gone," she said softly. "They left something behind. Something that is alive. It's not a message, it's an order." There is static at the end of the recording. In the meantime, strange things started to happen in small villages near the excavation site. People in the area said they had dreams of glowing snakes winding through the sky, voices speaking in languages they didn't understand, and vibrations that shook the ground for a few seconds at a time. Animals wouldn't drink from rivers that were close by. Compasses spun in strange ways. When health officials got there, they saw something else. Kids in these areas were unusually resistant to disease. Wounds healed much faster than normal, and their senses were sharper. They quietly took DNA samples. The analysis showed a small amount of sequence X47, which was dormant, but still there. It was getting bigger. The discovery spread like a virus through the scientific underground, shared in secret forums, whispered about in dark academic halls, and denied by governments, but impossible to stop. The leaked information from Carvajal's files showed one more horrible thing. The strange DNA, which was called sequence X47, had more than just genetic information. It also had data. When base pair patterns were put through computational translation models, they made structured binary clusters that matched astronomical constants, like the distances between known stars, the ratios of their orbits, and even the cycles of precession. But there was more to it. The computer crashed every time the algorithm tried to decode a certain part, not randomly, but in a planned way, as if the code was protecting itself. When looked at, one sequence looked like a spiral, which was very similar to the carved glyphs on the obsidian walls, a digital version of an old mirror. A research group linked to the government quietly took over the process of decoding. They went by the name Project Halak. The lead programmer started saying that the code was recursive within weeks. It wasn't supposed to be read, it was supposed to change. The system changed its output based on who looked at it, as if it were responding to the person. One by one, team members started to talk about having vivid dreams of tunnels made of light, old cities under the ocean, and eyes watching them from inside stone walls. It got harder and harder to tell the difference between hallucinations and reality as they went deeper. After that, the data stayed the same. The sequence made a fixed number string for 3 tests in a row. It turned into a date, a certain alignment of Venus and the Pleiades that would happen again in less than 3 years. The scientists didn't know it yet, but that date had been written down in Mayan codices hundreds of years ago as the day the sky serpents would come back. In the meantime, field teams went back to the excavation site, which was now being watched very closely. The round metal structure that was buried in the jungle had started to hum again, and this time it was louder. The vibration could be felt up to 20 miles away, changing the way animals move and even the weather in the area. It made short bursts of low-frequency sound that made people who stayed too close for too long see things that weren't there. Some workers said they heard voices from below calling them by name. It was like the jungle itself was changing. At night, the leaves shone with an iridescent glow. Bioluminescent fungi started to show up on the forest floor in perfect spiral patterns. People in the area said it was the earth waking up and the old blood moving again, and they were right. Blood samples from people who lived there showed something never seen before. The dormant gene, sequence X47, was starting to turn on. Cellular tests showed that ATP production went up, that neurons could regenerate on their own, and that in one very bad case, cells could die and then come back to life. After being destroyed, the tissue came back to life. It was no longer impossible. The body is changing its own biology based on a code that was written 13,000 years ago. But the change wasn't just in the body. Daniel Ortiz, a linguist who studied the oral traditions of the Highland tribes, saw that certain phrases kept coming up in their myths. When phonetic indexing was used, phrases that fit the binary pattern of X47 perfectly. The chants were literally linguistic keys, words that were meant to wake up the dormant code. They had been passed down through many generations. Every syllable is a switch, and every rhythm is a signal. When Ortiz played one of these chants near a DNA sample in a sound-controlled room, something that shouldn't have happened. The clusters of cells started to move. Don't split or copy. Move. They lined up in patterns that looked like spirals under the microscope. The song was breaking the code. That was when Project Halak stopped working. The researchers disappeared, military drones sealed off the jungle site, and the story died on the surface. But the villagers kept having dreams. In a faraway village, kids started drawing the same spiral glyphs that were in the old chamber, even though they had never seen them before. They said they saw lights in the water and heard voices speaking in a way that wasn't words. The elders recognized the signs. People called it the awakening of the old blood, which was the return of people who had come from between the stars. At this point, the problems were worldwide. Genetic databases from people living in places as far away as Polynesia and Siberia had found microfragments of X47. It wasn't just in Mesoamerica, it was all over the place. A signal that is spread out and hidden in the blueprints of humanity, waiting for a frequency to bring it back to life. And that frequency had come back. Satellites started to pick up bursts of energy coming from deep inside the Yucatan crust. Not radiation, but structured electromagnetic pulses that are perfectly timed with the time it takes Venus to go around the sun. When the signal was plotted, it looked like the metal ring below the jungle, a fractal spiral that got bigger with each pulse. Then, one night, all of the monitoring tools stopped working for exactly 11 minutes, which is the same amount of time as the ring's pulse. Every system within 100 kilometers lost contact. The temperature in the area had dropped by 7 degrees when they rebooted. For hours, the jungle canopy glowed faintly before fading back into darkness. The event was called an atmospheric anomaly, but people who saw it happen said something else. They said the ground moved, but not like an earthquake. It moved like something living, without wind. Trees bent. The air shook, and from beneath the ground came a sound that wasn't mechanical or natural. It was a harmonic resonance that sounded like a human voice humming from deep underground. A whistleblower in Mexico City was able to read Dr. Carvajal's recovered notes. The last thing she wrote was, "The sequence isn't a record of what happened in the past. It's a countdown. Nobody knows how she got there." But one part really stood out. The Maya didn't pray to gods. They were keeping a system going, a biological circuit made to keep something from growing. The system will turn back on when the pattern is complete and the frequency is right. The code, the blood, and the ring all work together. The human race is the interface. If she was right, the history of humanity wasn't about evolution. It was about survival. A long time ago, something was left behind in our DNA, like a key waiting for the lock to turn. And now that lock was turning. The jungle was no longer quiet. From above, satellite infrared images showed patches of ground, heating and cooling in a regular pattern, as if the land itself were breathing. Researchers camping miles away from the restricted area said they saw faint blue columns of light rising straight into the sky at night, only to disappear into the clouds. Local shamans said that Chan Ek, the celestial serpent, had come back. Scientists didn't know what to say. A week later, a team of seismic probes drilled near the edge of the metal ring to get samples. They didn't go very far. The drill bit hit something that wasn't solid. The sensors went crazy a few moments later, with frequencies changing, electrical surges, and magnetometers spinning. Then the ground shook beneath them once, hard enough to knock over their tools. A low, vibrating tone rolled through the jungle like thunder in the water. The birds flew away. The ring was the only thing that all the compass needles pointed to. The team backed off, shaken. But when they looked at the recording from the drill sensors, they saw that the data had changed in a strange way. It wasn't random noise, it was planned. Sound waves that create unique harmonic patterns that perfectly match the Fibonacci ratios found in ancient DNA. The machine wasn't just responding, it was reacting. The military closed off the whole area at dawn. Drones flew around in the airspace, and all field communications were blocked. But some bits of intercepted radio traffic got out online. One line stood out: containment breach, confirmed. Resonance of sequence X47 in living things, living beings. It didn't take long for reports to come in about people who were changing. At first, the changes were small, like heightened sensory perception, lucid dreams of glowing tunnels, and even electromagnetic interference when they touched electronic devices. Most of them came from the highland communities nearby, where people have lived for thousands of years, the keepers of the old blood. Before the area was closed off, an independent journalist talked to one of them, an old woman named Itzel. She spoke in a calm voice, and even in normal light, her eyes had a faint blue sheen. They called them gods, she said, but they were never gods. They built things. They made us look like them, but not in flesh and blood, frequency and pattern. The ring is their heart. We will remember who we are when it beats again. She was gone in a few days. The reporter who filmed the interview put the video on a number of servers. It spread quickly before being systematically deleted. But digital analysts saw something scary first. The audio waveform made geometric shapes that were just like the carved glyphs on the walls of the obsidian chamber every time she said certain syllables. The same frequency patterns that were in her DNA were coming from her speech. At that point, researchers understood something very important. It wasn't a technological activation, it was a biological one. The spoken word, or the human voice, was the key. The same chants that went on for thousands of years weren't prayers, they were commands for programming. Archaeologists in Honduras found a jade tablet in a sealed tomb around the same time. It was from about the same time as the first chamber. It showed a huge round building with people with long skulls all around it, each raising their hands toward a spiral that was coming down from the sky. The inscription that went with it said something like, "When the breath of the sky returns, the keepers will wake up and the gate will open." A door. Scientists laughed at the symbolism until they got new readings from the buried metal ring. It wasn't pulsing every 11 minutes anymore. It was speeding up. With each cycle, the frequency got closer to the electromagnetic resonance of the brain's alpha waves. It was in sync with consciousness itself. One experimenter tried direct exposure at Project Halak's last recorded session before the blackout. A volunteer was put in a Faraday chamber and exposed to a fake frequency pattern of the ring. Nothing happened at first. After 6 minutes, the subject's heart rate stabilized at exactly 72 BPM, which was the same as the ring's current cycle. There was a lot of brain activity. EEG readings made fractal waveforms that had never been seen before. Then the person began to talk, slowly, in a steady way. Not in Spanish, not in Mayan, and not in any other language that we know of. His words were arranged in harmonic intervals. When translated phonetically, they had the same Fibonacci coded ratios as sequence X47. He wasn't saying anything. He was sending out data. And then he grinned. Witnesses said that his eyes glowed a faint blue before all the lights in the building went out. He was gone when the power came back on. The room was empty, but the metal walls were covered in a thin layer of bioluminescent crystals that pulsed in time with the ring below the jungle. The official report said that the problem was with the equipment, but the internal memo, which was later leaked, said something else. Subject converted. Transmission successful. Weeks went by. In cities all over Central America, strange auroras started to show up. These were thin, shimmering veils of light that only lasted a few seconds. Birds moved around in strange ways. Whole flocks flew in circles before falling to the ground dead. Radio signals changed into tones that sounded like the ring's pulse. Then the dreams came. Thousands of people started to see the same things. An ocean of stars, a spiral hallway, and a voice whispering in frequencies instead of words. The message was always the same. We left the code. You are the most important person. Neuroscientists were confused. These weren't just random hallucinations. Brain scans showed that the neural patterns of people who were thousands of miles apart were in sync. There was a global signal being sent through the DNA network of all humans. The activation had spread all over the world. Governments rushed to stop it by making statements about mass psychogenic events, but they knew the truth deep down. The ring was awake, the code was working, and the story of how humans came to be was falling apart under its own forgotten weight. The next step started off quietly. Researchers who were watching high-frequency bursts from the Yucatan said that the ring was no longer just giving off energy, it was also taking it in, taking electromagnetic charge from the air and pulling static fields from storms nearby. Like it was getting ready to go. The pulse got stronger and louder until invisible pressure waves flattened whole areas of jungle. Drones filmed trees bending out in perfect spirals and then going back up. There were faint blue lines on the ground that looked like veins of light. They all moved toward the center of the ring. Whatever was buried down there was no longer sleeping. And then the signal went up. For the first time in recorded history, every GPS satellite in orbit had a glitch that was exactly the same for all of them. It lasted exactly 0.47 seconds. Analysts were able to find the coordinates of the signal's source after recalibrating it. Not just the Yucatan. 7 other places around the world also picked up the same resonance. Each of these places was close to an ancient megalithic site that was aligned with the stars. Easter Island in Egypt, Siberia, and Anatolia. All of the sites are pulsing at the same rate. All of the sites had something to do with myths about gods coming down from the sky. The code for sequence X47 wasn't just one, it was a global infrastructure, a network that was asleep and waiting for a cosmic signal to sync up. And now, it had. It wasn't a general, a politician, or even an archaeologist who first saw the pattern. It was a data analyst for a commercial DNA testing company who was alone in an office with fluorescent lights thousands of miles from the jungle. Mara Jimenez was her name, and her job was easy. Before customer reports went out, she had to flag any strange haplogroups, unusual recombinations, or anything else that could cause support tickets to pile up. It was normal most days, some statistical noise, a few rare bloodlines, that's all, until she saw the group. It looked like a problem with the software at first. A number of customer samples, all with a data integrity warning, all had unusually high levels of unclassified non-coding sequences. But what bothered her wasn't the fact that the anomaly was there, it was how it was built. When she put the affected parts from different customers on top of each other, they lined up too perfectly. The same pattern keeps coming up, the same ratios built in. It wasn't by chance. It wanted to clean it up. The automated filter marked it as artifactual noise, but something made her stop. She sent the raw sequences to another program that lined them up. The pattern stayed the same. It got sharper. She had seen it before. In a late-night forum thread, there was a leaked picture of an unauthorized lab report. X47 in order. The company's policy was clear. Tell the research partnership liaison about anything strange. That name sounded safe. It wasn't. It was a direct line to contractors working for the government. Mara's access to the terminal was taken away within 24 hours. Her account was locked, and a non-disclosure agreement appeared in her inbox with the word mandatory next to it. But the system was too late. She had already printed the graph. She sat in her quiet apartment and stared at the black and white spiral of numbers that somehow felt like a living thing. Every one of those samples came from a modern person, normal customers who had paid to learn about their family history. Most of them were said to be partially or mostly descended from Mesoamerican groups. A lot of them came from the Yucatan and Guatemalan highlands, which is where they came from, the old blood. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was also in her veins. Her grandmother, who was from Campeche and was quiet, never wanted to talk about where the family really came from. She said, "Some stories are not meant to be told. They are for carrying." Mara found her own DNA report. A small note at the bottom that she had missed the first time. Trace unclassified sequences detected. Not harmful, not known to be medically relevant. Now it throbbed like a warning. She ran her own raw data through. The outside program again. The same spiral pattern filled the screen. X47 in order wasn't just out there, It was in her, thousands of miles away, in museum vaults and archive basements. Codices that had long been thought to be symbolic myths began to take on new meaning because of the discoveries. When you look at the leaked genetic data, pages that used to be thought to be about cyclical ages or divine battles now seem to say something else. Bloodlines were real, not just words. They were real. A glyph that is often translated as sacrifice was found next to a symbol that has been historically translated as debt or balance in one damaged codex fragment. After looking at it again, archaeologists suggested a darker translation, reset. The sacrifices were not gifts. They were resets of the system, which were attempts to slow down or stop the activation sequence written into the blood. The end of the Maya no longer looked like a failure. It looked like it was going to shut down. There were more than just royals in the elite classes. They were the ones whose skulls had been artificially lengthened to look like a more ancient natural trait. They might have been the ones who showed the most X-47, the living carriers of the code in its purest form. Their rituals, bloodletting, and obsession with the positions of the stars all fit with a terrible possibility. They were trying to control something they didn't fully understand. A sign, a device, a genetic program that could erase everything if it wasn't stopped. It seemed that the Maya's real beginnings weren't the start of a civilization. They were a sign that something had happened. The more the linguists and geneticists looked into it, the clearer the pattern became. Stories about those who came from the sky were always about blood, memory, and cycles. In one story that has been passed down in a remote highland community, the first people were opened by the visitors from the sky and rewritten so they would remember the path when the stars were in pain. Rewritten. The Maya were more than just the descendants of hunter-gatherers who moved around and settled down to study math and astronomy. They were the ones who got a planned genetic change. A small group of early humans chose, changed, and were responsible for keeping up a planetary-scale system that they only partially understood. It was part observatory, part alarm, and part gate. And the worst part was that they didn't have a choice. The pulse of the ring kept getting stronger in the jungle. Satellite data showed that every spike happened at the same time as changes in the Earth's magnetosphere. Small, but you can measure it. People were looking into the planet's shield. The buried anomalies were similar at all of the global sites, including Egypt, Easter Island, Anatolia, and Siberia. Not the same, but in tune, like different instruments that are all tuned to the same key. There were stories of star gods, earth teachers, serpent spirits, and sky boats in each region. Each had megalithic buildings that contained impossible astronomical accuracy. It was never different. It was one system that covered all of the continents and lasted for thousands of years, and blood was always at the center of it. Researchers in secret medical facilities started to see strange side effects in people with a lot of X-47 expression. Their brains quickly adjusted to new patterns, making neural connections at a speed that was almost scary. They had better spatial awareness, an intuitive understanding of how orbits work, and in some cases, the ability to sense small changes in electromagnetic fields, like static hums and flickers of unseen currents. One person, a young man of Maya descent from Chiapas, wouldn't stay inside. He said the walls blocked the song when asked why. When asked to explain, he kept drawing the same spiral pattern, each time making it more complicated and closer to the exact map of the Pleiades, as seen from Earth 13,000 years ago. He had never learned about astronomy. When he was put in a Faraday-shielded chamber where all outside signals were blocked, he stopped moving, and his eyes lost focus. Monitors showed that his heart rate, brain waves, and tiny muscle movements were all in line with the ring's pulse pattern. Then, out of nowhere, he started to say strings of numbers. The researchers wrote them down. Later, they figured out that these numbers matched the orbital periods of several exoplanets in a dense dust region in the Taurus constellation. This was the same area where ancient inscriptions called it a river or corridor in the sky. The builders had done more than change human DNA. They had given their address. At that moment, the words true origins meant something else. The Maya did not come from the jungle. They were grown there like instruments that were tuned to pick up and store information from other stars. The sacrifices, temples, and codices all worked together to make a system that used people's bodies as living archives, people's bodies as hard drives, minds of people as receivers, and the code was coming to life. Mara felt it before she knew what it was. At first, it was just a pressure behind her eyes and a low hum that she thought was caused by city noise or stress, but it didn't stop when she left town. The hum got louder in the country, where there were no power lines or cars. She started to dream about places she had never been during the night. Cities made of stone surrounded by jungle, stairs going up to black skies full of bright, unblinking stars. She moved through them in her dreams as if she were following a map that was carved into her bones. She woke up one morning with a phrase on her tongue that she didn't know how to say, but she spoke it fluently in that half second between sleep and waking. She wrote it down phonetically, even though she was shaking. Later, she found the same phrase, glyph by glyph, in a scanned image of a long-forgotten Maya inscription that had been cataloged decades ago. The translation is, "We become them when they come back." The builders didn't just leave behind tools and machines. They had left themselves broken, spread out, and encoded in the DNA of those early humans, which had one scary meaning. Activation might not lead to contact with a civilization that is far away. It could bring them back here, through us, not like ships in the sky, but like one mind taking over another. The original architects woke up in bodies that weren't theirs. The true origins of the Maya weren't a story about their proud heritage. They were a nightmare. A group of people turned into caretakers and eventually vessels for an alien mind. Their whole culture was built around keeping a system going so that someone else could come back. The right frequency was all that was needed. The right alignment. the right time in the cosmic cycle. And that time was getting closer. The countdown didn't show up in the sky. It showed up in comments, anonymous posts on obscure forums, broken text on old blogs, and broken subtitles on old documentaries all have bits of the same message hidden in character encodings and audio spectrums. Mara only found it because she kept looking. She looked through leaks, edited PDFs, and blurry stills from videos that had been taken away. The same pattern kept coming up no matter where she looked. This time, not the spiral sign. A string of dates carved into the metadata of images and hidden in the noise floor of audio files. At first, they seemed random, but when she put them on her wall and drew lines between them, they made a shape that she knew right away. The Yucatan's outline. Someone, or something, had been trying to talk back, taking over the digital noise of the planet in the same way that the builders had once taken over human DNA. It became clearer the more she mapped. Every coordinate led to an archaeological site, a temple, a sea note, a place where blood, stone, and sky were once connected in a ritual. The last coordinate was not the same. It wasn't in the woods. It was in a town. Her town. The address led to an unremarkable building that was just another concrete block surrounded by street vendors and flashing neon lights. On paper, it was a place for storing data that several biotech companies had hired. It was really a vault. She didn't come in. She didn't have to. She found what she had already suspected inside. Rows and rows of drives, blinking steadily in the cool dark. For years, the world had been sending its secrets here. Spit in tubes, swabbed cheeks, and tiny vials of blood. Health panels, ancestry kits, and Find Your Roots campaigns. People had willingly given up their genetic map, and someone had been using it to listen in. There was a group of machines at the back of the room that weren't on any of the plans. Cylindrical units, wrapped in cables, with a pattern, carved into their surfaces that she had only seen in stone. Spirals that fit inside of other spirals. Light pulsed along their seams in a slow, steady way. She got close to one and felt it before she touched it. A vibration in her bones. A familiar hum that matched her heartbeat and rose in her chest. Her sight became blurry. The server room disappeared for a moment, and in its place was an endless web of light stretching out in all directions, like a web between stars. There were millions of nodes that flared up in that lattice. There was a person in each one. She heard voices that were mixed up and hard to understand. Memories that weren't hers. A city from long ago that is now covered in plants. A sky ripped apart by fire. Hands raised to the sky, not in prayer, but as a warning. Then one thought broke through the noise, clear and sharp as glass. "We don't live here." Mara staggered back, breathing hard. The room came into focus. The machines kept pulsing, not caring. Lines of code were scrolling by on a nearby screen, and they were always changing. They weren't orders, they were matches. Profiles were being flagged one by one, based on the level of X47 expression in their DNA and how well their neural architecture fit the pattern. Possible receivers, possible hosts. She shook her hands as she scrolled. Names, ages, and places. A distribution that covered many continents, but was made up of groups of people with the same bloodline. Lines from the past. Lines that aren't visible. Descendants of people who used to look up at the night sky and not wonder what it was, but know what it was. The true origins of the Maya never meant where they came from. It had always been about why they were made. They weren't the start of a story. They set things in motion. The first successful test of a new type of ship that could carry memories across worlds, through extinctions and through the slow death of stars. And that test had worked. So well, in fact, that pieces of that code had spread out, hitchhiking on migration, war, love, and survival, and quietly weaving themselves into the fabric of humanity. The signal finally caught up after 13,000 years. A countdown was going down to 0 on another screen, in a language that no one had programmed. It wasn't connected to calendars, clocks, or local time. It had to do with how things move in space, how things line up in the sky, and when the Pleiades, Venus, and Earth would be in the same geometric shape they were when the builders first got there. That moment was less than a year away. She thought about breaking the drives, cutting the power, and setting everything on fire. But it wouldn't matter if she did. The ring in the jungle kept pulsing. The structures that were buried all over the world hummed together. Kids had dreams about spirals. Elders whispered chants that had been forgotten. The activation was no longer limited to labs or machines. People had it. An old stone calendar sat, half buried in a museum basement in another part of the world. It was wrongly labeled as a replica, and its glyphs were never fully translated. Under new light, the central panel showed a carved face. It was not a god's face, but a human's face with long features, closed eyes, and a mouth that looked like it was about to breathe. A ring of glyphs around the face spelled out a phrase that people had always read figuratively: "The day we get up." For the first time, a younger researcher who knew about the leaks and whispered theories gave a different interpretation. "The day they wake up in us." There wasn't much of a difference, but it was all of it. The metal ring finished another cycle deep underground. Sensors picked up a spike that was short, strong, and then went away. For 11 seconds, a thin column of the Earth's magnetic field twisted into a spiral. It was real, but it couldn't be seen or touched. During those 11 seconds, people all over the world felt a pressure behind their eyes. A flood of pictures. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a huge river of stars, not knowing if I was about to fall in or cross it. Most of them shook it off. A spell of dizziness. A strange time. That's all. A few of them didn't get over it. A boy in the Highlands woke up from a seizure and spoke a dead language perfectly. A woman who had never left her village drew a map of constellations as they would look from a place far above the Earth's ecliptic in a coastal town. In a busy city, a stranger stopped in the street, looked up, and whispered a word that no one understood. But when it was played back and studied, it matched an inscription carved into an obsidian wall under the jungle thousands of years ago. The word meant something like, "Come back." The shaky and out-of-focus video made it to the internet. It was shared again and again, remixed, and filled with comments. Some people said it was fake, Some people said it was proof. Others laughed and kept going, not knowing they were seeing a small part of a much older story. This could be a tale. A theory that people talk about in secret documentaries and late-night threads. Made up of coincidences, misread glyphs, and corrupted files. A thought experiment about what it would mean if our blood held not only our past, but also the future of someone else. There is no sequence X47, at least not officially. The ring in the jungle is a natural formation, according to the government. There were never any glowing bones. The dreams are only dreams. Like all other civilizations, the Maya rose and fell. Their achievements were carved in stone, and their mysteries were poetic, not programmable in an official way. But somewhere out there, under roots, rivers, and ruined temples, machines that are older than our written history still hum beneath the ground, waiting for a sky they remember better than we do.